With the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, all policies in the Western world changed. Ukraine's conflict with Russia since 2014 has been a great awakening for the West about the nature of mechanized and modern industrial warfare. Because in order to fight modern wars, nations need industry and a strong supply chain to access the raw materials of war and turn them into weapons. The war in Ukraine showed that Western nations were not ready for an industrial war. But the Paris leadership has recognized this and has begun to prepare for war. The Ukrainian conflict is preparing France for war as part of the reforms that will take place over the next 2 decades. But is France preparing for war against Russia? What are the main reasons behind this preparation? In this video, we take a deep dive into all the details of France's preparation for an industrial war. The first sign that a country is considering engaging in an active conflict outside its shores is when the country's political leadership begins to justify to its own people and allies that it is necessary or inevitable to engage in conflict. The second sign occurs when industries that will support the country's war effort are asked to shift gears and significantly increase their production. The third sign is when the leadership of the armed forces echoes the call of the political leadership and publicly declares its wholehearted support for the cause. All 3 signs are now visible in France. In June 2022, during Eurosatory, the land-based armaments fair in Paris, President Macron first stated that France must enter a war economy mode. This was a few months after Russia's special operations in Ukraine began. Since then, President Macron has been very vocal in criticizing Russian aggression. Macron has not been kind to NATO and its doctrine of support for allies or potential allies. He has actively defended an independent European defense and security mechanism without any dependence on the United States. Still, in his view, he managed to inject some life into a NATO that was brain dead at the end of the war in Ukraine. But it was not enough. Macron himself was criticized for saying that European troops in Ukraine were inevitable. The French armed forces, especially within the military, have become increasingly bold about the role that the country's military personnel can play in Ukraine, especially after the end of hostilities. This momentum of the initiative is determined by 2 main factors. The first is a change in the balance of war in Ukraine. This has been exacerbated by the arrival of 10,000 North Korean troops to support Russia, Moscow's deployment of ballistic weapons, and Vladimir Putin's repeated threats against countries supplying missile systems to Ukraine. These developments have now brought greater urgency to calls from Kiev's allies for increased support, which they believe is crucial to prevent a Russian victory. The second factor is international political developments. In particular, the imminent return of President-elect Donald Trump to the White House is putting the UK and France on high alert. Trump's re-election has raised strong fears among Europeans about the future of U.S. support for Ukraine in light of his previous ambivalence towards NATO and skepticism about large-scale foreign interventions. This concern is leading European leaders to consider taking a more proactive role in Ukraine's defense and stabilization. France has realized that a strong European partnership is necessary for such a troop deployment to be credible and effective. However, Germany and Italy strongly oppose the idea. There is a sneaking suspicion, however, that if this were to happen, Poland would align itself with France. Because if Ukraine falls, the Russians will be on the Polish border. The French defense minister has advised France's industry and R&D to prepare for a major geopolitical shift in Europe. Both civilian and defense companies have been asked to prioritize defense. The country's defense spending increased from 38 billion euros in 2015 to 48 billion euros in 2022. Making it Europe's biggest spender in the sector. The French defense sector has received $30 billion in orders, and these orders will infiltrate all layers of the sector, helping them increase their output. The commander-in-chief of the French armed forces reported that French strategic and conventional forces are ready for any eventuality. The commander-in-chief said that France could deploy a 20,000-strong division to confront the coalition within 30 days, and that it could join with other allied countries to command an army of around 60,000. The French army has 121,000 troops, and 24,000 reservists could be called up. As France expands its military power, it also aims to clamp down on Russia. In this context, France announced that it is preparing to send troops to NATO's eastern flank. The possible deployment area seems to be the areas close to the Belarusian border and Kaliningrad. However, France's planned deployment will be shaped by a military exercise in Romania. Next year will be a critical test for the French army as it transforms into a force capable of confronting Russia. In May, French troops will take part in a large-scale military exercise in Romania called Spring 2025, which will assess their ability to move quickly to NATO's eastern flank. This is an important qualification in case Russian President Vladimir Putin decides to attack an alliance member. The head of the Army's European Land Command, General Bertrand Turgeus, said that we used to play war games. Now there is a designated enemy, and we are training with people with whom we will actually go to war. So exercises like the Dacian Spring are a strategic signal for Russia. Over the last few years, France's ground forces have undergone a profound transformation to be ready for a high-intensity conflict similar to the war in Ukraine. The French army has also received a new marching order from NATO. By 2027, France should be able to deploy a combat-ready division in 30 days, including ammunition and supplies. Moving towards this goal is at the center of next year's Dacian Spring exercise. The French army will train to send a combat-ready brigade to Romania in 10 days. If successful, the army is an intermediate step that will reaffirm France's credibility with its NATO allies and pave the way to reach the 2027 target. A brigade is made up of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers, while a division is made up of 10,000 to 25,000 soldiers. The challenge will be to reach Romania in such a short time, because there is still no military Schengen, and military mobility in Europe needs to be drastically improved. The first deployment of troops to Romania in 2022 was plagued by bureaucracy, border procedures, and trains unsuitable for military equipment. Countries have worked to iron out such complications. French military officials said they had made much progress in diversifying their routes. The military used to rely solely on trains, but now transports troops and equipment by trucks and boats, sometimes even combining different modes of transportation. Whichever way France sends its troops, the move is likely to shake the Russian leader. But can France's arsenal challenge Russia in the event of war? While the Russians are firing 20,000 artillery shells a day in the Ukraine war, an average of 600,000 shells are fired a month. With so many artillery shells, countries like the United States could only withstand a 2 to 3 month long war as they exhausted their ammunition stocks. Following the end of the Cold War in 1989, throughout the 1990s, France and other Western countries began to sell their stockpiles of ammunition and other industrial capacity in the hope of peace after the end of the Cold War. This left countries no longer ready for an industrial war. Industrial war requires the ability to repair and resupply equipment quickly. The Russian Federation has lost over 1,000 tanks fighting in Ukraine, and it is claimed that Russia still has over 70 years of military equipment that it could burn through. It is estimated that the Russians are losing 10 tanks a day. This further proves the need for robust populations with industrial capacity to ensure that the fighting men and women on the front lines have the necessary equipment to wage modern warfare. During these conflicts, Ukrainians lose tanks every day, and on average, 5 out of every 10 Russian tanks are abandoned by Russian soldiers, and the wrecks made available to Ukrainian divisions. As long as the Russians continue to supply equipment to the Ukrainians, they will be able to continue fighting to defend their country with the logistical support and intelligence of the Western world. France is preparing for war with just over 500 tanks in stock. But this will not be enough to cover the tank losses in the conflict in eastern Ukraine. With the losses in Ukraine, the French will lose 20% of their tank force every month. This is unsustainable for the current French war effort because it takes years to build the industrial capacity to compensate for the loss of equipment. The Ukrainians in the current war should be fine because they buy half of their tanks from the Russian Federation, which makes this war sustainable in terms of raw materials. After all, the Russians supply the Ukrainian army well. France's war preparations are part of the 20-year Scorpion Plan, which is expected to end in 2040. In the 21st century, this may change as the nature of warfare changes, but nations trying to plan for the future are looking at present developments. From the American military, the French have adopted whole area command and control, covering all levels of the military on and off the battlefield. Information sharing communications will ensure greater coordination and victory for the French army. The U.S. superiority in warfare was demonstrated during the First Gulf War in 1990, 1991, and the invasion of Iraq in 2003, when the superiority of U.S. military doctrine and use of data was proven by crushing the Iraqi army twice. One example of American success was the advance of Marine Corps divisions towards the Iraqi capital Baghdad. However, the Marines clashed with enemy tank divisions and were pinned down. The U.S. Marine Corps units had only armored Humvees at their disposal, but thanks to their superior data and communications capabilities, they were able to coordinate an airstrike that destroyed the Iraqi armor and saved the U.S. Marines. This use of intelligence has been seen before and continued throughout the war in Ukraine. One of the modernizations of the French army is its mechanized arsenal, and the new tank division is the new BRC Jaguar, which replaces the 40-year-old AMX-10RC. The new tank has a superior gun. Its armor is simpler and suitable for mass production. This is perfect for modern industrialized countries and wars with high material losses. The new tank, the EBRC Jaguar, costs less than 1 million euros, thus reducing the cost for the French Republic and taxpayers. Parts for the tank are also available on the commercial market, so when looking for materials and spare parts for the new French tank on the battlefield, spare parts are readily available. The overall advantage of the EBRC Jaguar is that the cost of a tank is 1 million euros or less, depending on financial requirements. It weighs 25 tons and has 3 crew members, a commander, a driver, and a gunner. The armor is rated to be resistant to ballistic weapons and mines, and is resistant to improvised explosive devices, more commonly known as IEDs. This is likely heavily influenced by the experience of America and its allies in the 20-year war in Afghanistan from 2001 until the American withdrawal in 2021, led by U.S. President Joe Biden. Unlike the BRC Jaguar, which costs 1 million euros and whose commercial parts are used by the public, the Americans have the Stryker tank, which costs $5 million per tank. The French infantry is also upgrading to the new VBMR Griffin, which will have commercially available interchangeable parts. Its components are interchangeable with the EBRC Jaguar. The new armored personnel carrier will replace the old French VAB troop carrier transport vehicle used since 1976. In other words, France is strengthening its hand in case of a possible war with the Russian army. On the other hand, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's latest analysis of arms transfers, the big winners in the global arms race are the United States and France, while Russia's arms transfers have fallen sharply. France, the European Union's arms giant, has increased its share of the export market from 7.2% in the previous 5-year period to 11%, thanks to its efforts to penetrate regions dominated by Russia, such as India. Moscow's share of global arms exports fell from 21% to around 11%, just below France. With a 93% decline, Russia was eclipsed in the list of arms export figures. France ranks second behind the United States, whose share of global arms exports rose from 34% to 42%. France's rise in the ranking is thanks to important deals Dassault Aviation has made with countries such as Qatar, Egypt, and India for the Rafale fighter jet. In recent years, India, Egypt, and Indonesia have preferred French fighter jets in competitions involving Russian alternatives. Experts say that French exports are technically attractive and deliveries are usually fast. Arms export figures are driven by defense spending. This has also been a recent focus for France. The government in Paris seems to have outdone Moscow in terms of the country's defense spending. On the other hand, France identifies nuclear and conventional military capabilities and defines deterrence in terms of nuclear capabilities. In its 2022 National Strategic Review, France states that credible nuclear deterrence is vital to secure their freedom of action and protect their core interests. It is the cornerstone of their defense strategy. The primary function of deterrence is to prevent a major war that could threaten France's survival by protecting it against both state-sponsored aggression that threatens its critical interests and any attempt at coercion. Maintaining the long-term credibility of its deterrence capacity is of utmost importance for France, especially in today's complex and uncertain world, where some countries are rapidly expanding their nuclear arsenals and even threatening to use nuclear weapons to intimidate or coerce. France interprets deterrence only through the lens of nuclear capability. Unlike the United States and the United Kingdom, France does not envision an integrated deterrence approach using both nuclear and conventional forces. Moreover, France adheres to a policy of strategic adequacy, in which it keeps the country's nuclear arsenal to only the minimum necessary to meet strategic challenges. The use of nuclear weapons is severely restricted and reserved for extreme cases of self-defense. Unlike the US and the UK, which have extended deterrence policies, participate in NATO's nuclear planning mechanisms, and have their nuclear forces dedicated to NATO, France does not. France maintains a defensively independent and sovereign deterrence. These exclusionary policies on deterrence hinder France's ability to maximize its deterrence effect against an increasingly aggressive Russia and reduce France's ability to function as a truly global and regional power. A logical question is why France has not changed its deterrence policy and rejoined the NATO nuclear fold by adopting integrated deterrence. Current political and military factors interact to prevent this change for the time being. France faces a significant security challenge due to increasing strategic competition and conflict with Russia. The country's deterrence strategy plays an important role in ensuring its freedom of action and protecting its core interests. However, France's political policies and reluctance to use conventional military forces in its deterrence strategy provide opportunities for Russia to exploit known points of friction between France and NATO. The United States can play a vital role in managing the Russian threat in a way that best protects U.S. security interests and advances regional partnerships in Europe. The United States should understand France's reluctance to fully participate in NATO's deterrence framework and respect its preferences while protecting U.S. security interests. Cooperating and constructively engaging with France through alternative multilateral mechanisms can go a long way in building trust and effectively addressing concerns. The United States should support France and other European countries in developing their defense structures and strategies, while continuing to work towards a comprehensive and cooperative approach to regional security. In conclusion, Macron is perhaps the only European leader who has read the foreseeable future correctly, and he is brave enough to say so in public. Wars cannot be fought by any nation that is completely dependent on supplies of equipment and munitions from other countries. Even a defensive war is not possible, not to mention an intense and offensive war. All supporting countries and their governments, despite their good intentions, have their own political imperatives that they cannot ignore. Moreover, in a protracted war, the governments of allies can change, along with their political morality. So if France is going into war economy mode, it is not doing anything wrong. So what do you think about this issue? Let us know in the comments. Throughout history, efforts have been made to increase the mobility of the infantry column, which traditionally moved on foot. This has included putting infantry on horses, mules, camels, and wagons. This approach was driven by the need to deploy infantry faster and farther, and to reduce the effects of fatigue on the infantry. The late 16th century dragoons are an early modern example. They rode into battle on horseback, dismounted in a secure area where the horses were held and then fought on foot. In the early 20th century, before the widespread adoption of the combustion engine, one of the last examples of mounted infantry was the British Army's mounted infantry. By the 21st century, infantry were equipped with armored vehicles and began to appear on the battlefield. The Ukrainian War, which has become the most violent phenomenon of this century, has once again revealed the importance of armored infantry fighting vehicles. In this context, the Ukrainian army's inventory was reinforced by its Western allies. In particular, the armored vehicles and other military equipment provided by France to Ukraine became an important force multiplier. But what do we know about France's military support to Ukraine? What role does this equipment play in the war? For answers to our questions and more, our video begins. In February 2023, French journalist Jean-Dominique Mercier reported that France was ready to provide Ukraine with 25 AMX-10P infantry fighting vehicles. However, no official announcement was made about the delivery. Last day, a video was published by the Russian state news agency TASS. According to the video, the Russian National Guard used a drone to destroy an AMX-10P infantry fighting vehicle used by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region. This event is significant in that it confirms for the first time the delivery of AMX-10P vehicles from France to Ukraine, following previous speculation about their transfer. However, due to the quality and resolution of the video footage, it remains difficult to independently confirm whether the destroyed vehicle was an AMX-10P IFV. The visual evidence is ambiguous, and the identification of the vehicle as French-made is largely based on a statement by the Russian National Guard. Without additional verification or closer examination of the wreckage, the exact model and origin of the vehicle remains unclear. The press service of the Russian National Guard stated that a UAV operator detected and destroyed an AMX-10P during a combat mission. The APC was immobilized after triggering a mine during the transport of Ukrainian personnel and equipment towards the front lines. The Ukrainian troops abandoned the vehicle and took refuge in a forested area, where they were then targeted and eliminated by artillery fire directed by Rosgvardia forces. So what are the characteristics of the French vehicle that fueled the speculation? The AMX-10P is a French-designed tracked armored infantry fighting vehicle manufactured by Giat Industries starting in the 1970s. It was one of the first IFVs developed to support mechanized infantry. It combined mobility, firepower, and armor to protect troops and effectively engage enemy forces. It was equipped with a 20mm GIAT M693 F2 automatic cannon mounted in a turret capable of hitting both ground and low-altitude air targets, and a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun for additional firepower. Powered by a Hispano-Suiza HS115-2 diesel engine producing 260 horsepower, the vehicle can reach a maximum road speed of 65 km/h and has an operating range of approximately 600 kilometers. The AMX-10P features fully welded aluminum armor designed to protect against small arms fire, shell fragments, and landmines. It is also fully amphibious and equipped with 2 rear-mounted water jets that allow it to reach speeds of 7.2 km/h in water. This makes it highly versatile in a variety of combat environments. The vehicle accommodates a crew of 3 and can carry up to 7 fully equipped infantry soldiers. Despite its retirement from French service, the AMX-10P continues to be used in many countries, where it is valued for its adaptability and robust performance in combat scenarios. Its deployment in Ukraine, now confirmed, highlights its continued importance in modern conflicts. The destruction of the AMX-10P by Russian forces is the first confirmed use of these French-supplied vehicles in Ukraine. This revelation highlights the extent of Western military assistance to Ukraine and France's role in providing advanced armored vehicles to strengthen Ukrainian defense capabilities. As the conflict continues to develop, further developments regarding the operational impact of the AMX-10P are expected. On the other hand, in addition to the AMX-10P IFVs, France has significantly strengthened Ukraine's military capabilities through various forms of support.